What does it mean to live a resilient life? I'm Ryan Mannion. I lost my brother to war and my mom to cancer, and I've learned a lot about myself along the way. Now, as the CEO of Travis Mannion Foundation, I'm on a journey to explore what it means to be resilient against life's many challenges. Join me and some incredible guests as we ask ourselves the hard questions and define what it means to struggle well. All right, welcome back to another episode of the Resilient Life podcast. We have Sage Steele with us here today. Sage, thank you so much for joining us. Super excited to have you on the podcast and excited to get to talk to you.
I know this has been a long time in the making, so thank you for your patience. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there was a lot going on these past few months, so it's a good time.
True. This is true. There's been a lot.
Yes. Well, I'd love to start off with you because we have a lot in common. Your dad is a retired colonel in the Army. My dad is a retired colonel in the Marine Corps. So, it looked like you moved around a lot until you were in 7th grade. Is that right? You were all over the place.
Yep, it continued, unfortunately. Yes, all over like 4 countries by the time I was in 7th grade. And then stayed in Colorado Springs, Fort Carson, Colorado from 7th grade through 11th grade. And then the military said, hey, nice try. She's not going to be allowed to graduate from the same high school. So senior year had to move from Colorado to Carmel, Indiana, outside of Indianapolis. Fort Benjamin Harrison is the former Army post there. So that was a tough one to swallow, the senior year move. And, you know, I was a young senior. I was 16 and not fun, but I wouldn't change it now. It's all for a reason, right?
Yeah, it's so funny because I don't know about you, but so the first 11 years of my life, we moved 13 times. And I always talk about how much I hated it. Like, I absolutely despised it. It was the worst thing ever. I was so envious of people that, would talk about their best friends since kindergarten. Oh, yes. Me and Katie, we've been best friends. And I'm like, I'm never going to have that. And, yep. and really it followed me until it's just been within the past 10 years that I've started to look at it almost as an advantage and, really taught me a lot about adversity and, dealing with things at a young age that most kids don't deal with. I mean, it's just not, most kids grow up in, the same area, the same town. I always say that like the biggest disadvantage to my kids is that they never moved out of the town they grew up in. We moved a mile down the road and you thought like their world was ending. And I'm like, you guys have no idea. I think it teaches you something, and I have such a soft spot for military children, being one myself and dealing with that. And so I'm always thinking about these military kids and like the changes that they have to make from a young age, which is like, it's super tough. It's super tough.
It's super tough, but I'm like you. I feel like it is an advantage. I didn't know it at the time. I also didn't know that anybody lived any differently because when you are around just military kids, especially if you're living on base or post, then they're all in the same situation, which is why I think most military kids are really kind and understand, like they're just accepting of everybody. That diversity, equity, inclusion thing, shoot, we had that down 100 years ago because that's what it was like when you are moving to different countries, different states, different whatever. And you know what it's like to be the new kid. So you're going to make sure that when another new kid comes in the class, which happened all the time, right?
Yep.
That you're going to be welcoming. And yes, they can be on your kickball team. They can be invited to the birthday party, even though they don't know you or you don't know them. It's I always say it's such a diverse, inclusive, wonderful upbringing. It's just come second nature to us, I agree with you that there are times where I'm like kind of sad because I don't have a hometown. I don't have a place to say this is where me and my friends, did this on the weekend as a high schooler, or this is the t-ball field. Like we'd have to go to a different country to show them where I played t-ball. And that's okay. I also got to have neighbors who, when we lived in Belgium, on this side, they were from Belgium. On this side, they were from Norway. Across the street, they were from Turkey. like literally. And we couldn't even speak each other's languages, but we figured out a way.
Yeah.
That's what kids do. And you just accepted everybody. I wouldn't change a thing. It did make me tougher, even though I didn't want it to. I wanted to just still stay in my shy little shell. And that didn't happen.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about growing up, because I get asked a lot what it was like to grow up with a father in the military, especially, you know, as he went on to become a colonel. And for me, my dad growing up was all of the ideas you have in your head of a colonel in the military. That was my dad. Like he was that guy. What was your dad like?
Probably pretty similar, but very kind, like a big teddy bear.
Yeah.
My dad is shrinking now because he's 78. He's had knee replacements and all kinds of neck surgeries because of, you know, health issues and cancer. And he's, by the grace of God, doing well right now. But he was at his peak, he was 6'6.5".
Wow.
And if you think back to those days, I mean, when he played football at West Point, I mean, 6'6.5", he was a giant in the mid 60s.
Sure.
Now that's just normal, but back then he was a giant. So for us, we viewed him as a giant as well, physically. But I was also the only girl, and I have 2 younger brothers. So I am the favorite and remain the favorite. I like to tell myself. But he was tough but loving. He very rarely yelled, but he had a voice, he had a tone. The way that he spoke, the way that his eyes would connect, you knew he meant business. My favorite thing was our Saturday morning room inspections, because at West Point, that's what they had to do. And so Saturday morning, not 9 a.m., 0900 hours, right? We had to say it the right way. And he would knock twice and he opens the door and we have to salute. And he says, "Are you prepared for inspection?" And of course you say, "Yes, sir." And he comes around and he inspects the room. It was a game, right? It was a game that was also a lesson to help us be appreciative of what we had. I thought we were rich. Obviously, military in the 70s and 80s, never, no, not possible. But we had everything we ever needed. And I had such a loving upbringing that those room inspections were actually fun. They were competitive between me and my brothers. He wanted that to happen. But we have nice things, you take care of them or they will be removed from your room.
Yeah.
Every infraction, like if the bed wasn't made properly, or we tried to shove something in the closet or wherever, every infraction was 10 push-ups. So like we were jacked. We had great arms at a very young age. I just remember a lot of moves, a lot of changes. My dad was always there. You know, I rode horses and ran track, and my brothers with basketball and wrestling. And he was always there, despite, like your dad, you know, being a battalion commander or some big important job where he was needed by his troops. My mother was there. They have been married 53 years, just had an anniversary in October. Awesome. And by the way, if anyone's bored, if you go on my Twitter, my X handle, there's a video there that I've had pinned there for like 7 years, because it's a wonderful story that NFL Films did on my parents. My brother works in the NFL, and they started on a story with him and then went, wow, they have a cool story. And that is the biggest gift I've ever been given, is something documented with my parents talking about their life early on and in the military, and breaking some barriers with an interracial marriage. My mom's white, my dad's Black, some really tough times. And so I've always been able to maintain perspective that, yes, it was hard to move and it was hard to make friends again. And I was super shy and awkward and all the things. But as I got older, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is nothing compared to what my parents pushed through to make sure we could have a great life. So I don't know. I think it'd be kind of boring, don't you? Like if we had just stayed in one town our whole lives.
Oh yeah, totally. And I love that now. Like I love being able to talk about where were you born? I was born in Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, you know, and then I went here and then I went there, and, you know, just being able to experience all that is not something that most kids do. And right. I can so relate, you know, push-ups were the modality of choice for anything, you know, like, and it's so funny because I have a 10-year-old son, and my dad is just like, my son will just be sitting there and he'll just turn to him and be like, Travis, have you been doing your push-ups? You know, how many push-ups did you do today? And I'm like,
Yeah.
geez, like it's all about the push-ups, you know? Push-ups are reign
And
supreme.
doing them the right way. Like there's a way to do them or else we're going to do them again.
Oh, 100%. Form is everything. So your dad played football at West Point. Was he the first Black football player at West Point?
First Black to play varsity football, yes,
Wow.
in 1966. I know, which is kind of crazy. On that NFL Films piece that I mentioned, there's a really cool shot because they talk about that. There's a really cool shot of, it's just a picture of their team photo, like in 1966 or 67.
Yeah.
And it's very easy to spot him and a sea of white faces. It's so funny if you think about now what football teams look like if you take a team photo, which every NFL team takes a team photo at the beginning of the year. So the thing that's so cool though is that he never focused on that. And his teammates didn't either.
Yeah.
He was just a damn good football player who actually ended up being drafted by the Detroit Lions. And he was like East-West Shrine Game, I think second team All-American, like drafted despite the NFL knowing that he had to fulfill his 5-year military obligation coming out of West Point. So he was a stud. He was a tight end. Heavily recruited by Joe Paterno. He was choosing between Penn State, of course, perennial powerhouse, especially then, Penn State and Army. And I don't know, he didn't talk about it with us because it didn't matter. The race thing didn't matter to him. I found out later, many years later, how good he was through my career and through talking to coaches I ended up working with, who I like Bill Parcells, you know, the Super Bowl champion coach of the New York Giants, who was an assistant coach at Army when my dad was there.
Wow.
Bob Knight, who I went to Indiana basically because I love Bobby Knight and basketball. And I got a chance when I was an intern at IU to ask him if he remembered my dad. And what he said was just unforgettable. So I had to learn about my dad and how he did things, not just his success, through other people, which says a lot about him because he's just super humble. However, his nickname, or like my kids, they call him Colonel, not Grandpa or Papa. He's Colonel. And I'm like, that's obnoxious. He's like, it's cool. Trust me. And they think that's his name. You know, my kids are old now and they understand, but I had the best upbringing and it was special to learn what he went through and what my mom and dad together went through as I've gotten older.
Yeah, it's so funny because everyone refers to my dad as the Colonel too. Like, what's the Colonel up to?
Yeah. Do they know each other?
I don't know. So my dad didn't go to a service academy. My brother went to Navy. But I have a daughter who is a plebe at the Naval Academy. And
no way. I didn't know that.
And her boyfriend they've been dating since high school, and he plays for the sprint football team at West Point. So we've got a big rivalry going on. He's a sophomore at West Point. He headed off to the service academy first, and then Maggie went to Navy, and Navy or West Point sprint football came to play Navy at Navy Marine Corps Stadium in Annapolis, and a week before, a sweatshirt shows up in my mailbox, and it's a West Point sprint football sweatshirt with Matt, my daughter's boyfriend's number on it. And I was like, okay, I got to I said, I will cheer for one Army sport, and that is the sprint football team. So I wore it, and I literally was getting looks in the stadium because they were like, why are you wearing this sweatshirt? I'm sitting. And West Point, or Navy ended up winning. But I proudly wore that. And that's what I love about the rivalry between these two teams. It's just like, it's the biggest rivalry in sports, but it's all love. And it's just, you know, I mean, you know that at the end of those 4 years, they're going to end up serving beside one another. And it's just such an amazing thing. And I'm in such awe of watching these kids, especially having a daughter there now. And just seeing, you know, the commitment that she's made. But I know that you have a daughter that's a freshman too, right? She's at Ole Miss.
Yeah, freshman at Ole Miss, and I have a junior and a senior. They're both at High Point University in North Carolina, which is wonderful. Let me commend you though, because to raise a daughter that's at a service academy, that says a lot about parenting. So congrats to you. I was not that successful apparently, and I would have loved to have gone myself, but I didn't have the grades for it. I love the military and I love the structure that comes with it, et cetera. But that's awesome. And I, grew up going to Army Navy. We moved back to West Point in 1973, I think. So I was like a year old, and my dad went back and he was one of the plebe coaches. And, this is early mid 70s. My brother was born there, and so I grew up going to the Army Navy games. Have gone with my dad several times, and it's always so special to see these old soldiers right down in the field. And he sees Charlie Company, and he starts, I don't know what he's saying. It's like a different language, right? All the cheers and the hooting and hollering, and then he can still fit in his letter jacket, by the way, and he's 78 years old. It's super cool to see. So I know he's going again this year, the one that's in DC. And I mean, there's a lot to get through before we get there, but that's going to be a heck of a game. Oh my gosh.
I mean, we've been talking about that this year is, well, now West Point being in the same conference as Navy.
Yeah.
This is going to be one of the biggest games because they're both really good this year. Now, Navy had a terrible performance last week, so we won't talk about that, but they're good teams.
Guess who's, you're going to see a great test, because guess who's playing Notre Dame this weekend?
Oh, yeah.
At Yankee Stadium. So I think obviously maybe we'll watch closely how Army performs against the team that crushed them.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
Yeah, that's going to be the bellwether that decides what happens with what the Army Navy game is going to look like. So I hope they perform the same way that Navy performed against Notre Dame. And then I'm ready for that match. But no matter what, what I love about the Army Navy game is that Army can go in with the most losing season they've ever had. I mean, there are years where Navy has won no games except for the Army Navy game. And it's like season made because they beat Army. Like, that is all that matters. And that's what a lot of people don't understand about this rivalry, not just from football, but with all the sports. Like, all that matters is that game, that match. My brother wrestled at Navy, and it was all about it was everything built up to Army Navy. Like, that was it. So it's very cool as a parent to watch. My daughter plays lacrosse there. So it's super exciting. But I was looking at your Instagram and I saw kind of your post, like the empty nest. Now she's my oldest, but I didn't realize, I've kind of watched people send their kids off to college, and I think I was a little bit cavalier about what that was going to look like. I was like, come on, like, it's a little much, but she went, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is super hard. It's super hard to send your kid off. So
it's like you're so proud of them, and so proud, like, that they made their decision and they have the courage to go start over away from us. As much as they say they can't wait to leave us, I'm convinced they miss us. I know they do, even if they won't admit it. But then it just goes so darn fast. And someone said to me, because I'm an empty nester now, although my girlfriend said, you're not an empty nester, you're a bird launcher.
Oh, I love that.
I kind of like that a little better. It feels a little bit better, but because mine are 18, 20, and 22, and just like that, it's over. And I'm so sad, but I'm also, and I'm single now. I was married for 20 years. I married my first boyfriend, together for 27 years. So 20 to 47, I was, and so it all happened at once, right? Like,
that's a lot.
Divorce and COVID all at the same time, drama at work, like, sue the company, start over, empty nester, bird launcher, election campaign, like, all at once. It's been a crazy couple of years. And I think that's why you've mentioned my post on Instagram. Like, I sold the house. I sold the house that we lived in Connecticut. Excuse me. And I sold everything in it. I had an estate sale, and it literally, each kid got to keep a couple things, but I'm like, guys, they're things, and we're moving on. And there's nothing left for me in Connecticut. I stayed after I left ESPN just to allow her. She was starting her senior year when I settled my case. So I'm like, well, we're gonna stay here and get her through. But there is nothing for me. It's super high taxes. It's terrible weather. People don't smile. I'm like, I'm out of here. But it was honestly, Ryan, it was all at once to become a bird launcher, as well as selling everything I owned and saying goodbye to a place that had been home for basically 17 years. But I'm super proud too, because I did raise three good kids. Their father, like we did a good job with these kids, and that's why they're able to go and thrive and be happy. And it's just you've heard it. I know you probably think it too. Like I always tell people, please cherish the tough times and those moments when they're young. And I remember being very present when my kids were little because I knew it was going to go fast.
Yeah.
And look, they're out. And so now I'm kind of starting over, which is cool. And I think it's also important for them to see us taking care of ourselves and not waiting until they leave for us as moms to take care of ourselves. I think that's something we don't do a good job of, frankly. So hopefully you are
How
giving them
was
a good
that?
example.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, you think about all of those things happening at the same time for you.
Yeah.
That had to be a
I'm
lot.
tired. I will admit to being a little tired, but
Yeah.
it's okay.
So what did you do from a mental health perspective? Like where were there some things that you leaned into that really helped you through that time? Or were you just like
You
going
know,
through it?
I've always been pretty active physically. That was helpful for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
But it's also hard when like I wasn't sleeping and, moving and doing it all by myself. And then I was, trying to start a new show, and I didn't do enough for my mental health. I'll say that. However, I have the two best parents who literally I still worry them, and I'll be 52 on Thanksgiving. Like, my goodness, you're never too old for your parents to worry about you. And so they have saved me in many ways, with all the things that have gone on. And I've always had a strong faith. I always have, but not as strong as it needed to be. And it's just been really cool to dive deeper into that and to they say let go and let God, and just stop trying to control everything. And since I've done that, it's indescribable what has happened. So that's been my mental health, which to me that should be the first thing I focus on, because I believe that everything falls into place if you're in a good place with your faith, your spirituality, whatever it is you believe in. So that's been a blessing to watch. And literally, I don't know what's happening day to day, but I've given up control, trying to control it and figure it out. And every day I end the day like, how did that happen? And how lucky am I?
Wow. That's awesome. You went through obviously pretty publicized breakup, we'll call it, with ESPN. And there were some things that and I don't know how much you can talk about this, but the one that I think is that is so interesting and sticks out, especially where we are now, is your statements about COVID and the COVID vaccine. And I guess ESPN had declared that it was mandatory to its employees. And, I mean, you basically said you respect an individual's decision to get the vaccine, but to mandate it is sick and scary. And, at the time, that was a controversial statement. Now, here we are, flash forward, and that is what everybody in the mainstream, I think on both sides, everybody's kind of saying the same thing. Like, you can't mandate somebody to do that. And so, do you feel some sort of vindication in some ways that the collective society has kind of come around to what you were already thinking at a time when it was so controversial to say that?
I don't think I've sat still long enough to think about that, and I probably should. I probably am subconsciously avoiding it because of how it played out. And I bit my tongue that day when I said that. And that was, yes, the direct quote, sick and scary, for an employer to force somebody to do something to their body. I do find it ironic how, especially in this recent election and what everybody on the left in particular says about my body, my choice, my body, my choice. And I guess it only applies when it's convenient for you with the topic that you agree with, right? And that's what I felt at that moment. when I was forced to do it, and ESPN is owned by Disney, so it was a Disney mandate, and I had literally come just directly from getting the shot that I had to get to keep my job.
Oh,
And
wow. So you had gotten
I
the
moved,
vaccine and then made the statement saying, I just don't agree with it, but you had done it.
I had literally just come from the
Wow.
stupid grocery store pharmacy where she put it in my arm because it was the last day possible for me to get the shot in order to be fully vaxxed by September 30th, 2021. That was our deadline. So this
Wow.
is mid-September, and I waited to the last day because I wasn't going to do it. And I was like, I'm going to take a chance and I'm going to let them fire me because this is wrong and I don't believe in it. And it wasn't like, it was simply about there not being enough research for
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
And it happened so fast. And then when you learned kind of the politics behind it, that when it was Donald Trump and he got the vaccine out there, then the left was like, I would never take that from Donald Trump. Like, that's ridiculous. But then once Biden got in office, if you didn't take the vaccine, the same vaccine, then you're an anti-vaxxer and you need to be canceled. You want to kill your grandparents. Like, so when I felt the politics involved in it, and then when I really dug deeper with the money that was involved with COVID and designating certain people's, deaths as COVID when actually they had COVID, but what killed them was the car accident that they were in, et cetera. I just did a lot of deep dives and it never felt right to me. And I just wanted more time, and please don't force me to do this to my body. Part of me is still mad at myself I feel like I caved in and did it. And people say you did it for the money. I guess I did it because I'm, as a divorced mother of three.
You needed a job.
My husband was a stay-at-home dad and remained a stay-at-home dad, I guess. So I was 100% responsible financially for all four of them at that moment and still. And so what was I going to do? Like, not have a paycheck and be on the street?
Right.
I guess. I could have moved and gone to my parents' basement. Like, those are the options, honestly, Ryan. Like, I'm not exaggerating. And so I was hot. I came into that podcast hot when I said what I said.
Well, yeah, I guess coming from the grocery store and just getting it. And, one of the things that I found so interesting was like, because, I didn't know exactly what you had said. I know you had said something regarding COVID. And then when I looked it up and I was like, okay, so your quote literally was, I respect an individual's decision to get the COVID-19 vaccine, but to mandate it is sick and scary. And I was like, I don't get it. Like, that in itself, this idea of the censorship that was taking place, I think is an even bigger issue than, it just opened up so many doors for, wow, like, and I think we were in the height of cancel culture at that time too.
We were.
So it was super easy. You were just low hanging fruit. You said something and it was like, boom, you're gone,
Well, and I got that. And I think, and then I had to immediately apologize in order to keep my job. They said I would not have a job. I would be fired if I didn't apologize for my comments. But I had to specifically not mention Disney or ESPN. I could only say the company. Like, there's so many things I look back on, but I was scared, and I knew in order to survive, I had to get that shot. And so vindication, yeah, a little bit, but I'm not happy about it. I'm sad at how it happened because it was so unnecessary and it was so wrong. And I'm just one of millions who had that decision to make. So I'm still, again, they say forgive but not forget. I don't know that I have anything to forgive them of because, or maybe that's on that I'm not quite ready. But I will never forget.
Yeah.
I think that why I ended up suing the company is different. It's because they silenced me and made me apologize and took assignments away and suspended me, took me off air for those comments, while allowing my peers to go on, because that was someone else's podcast on my day off. My peers on ESPN airwaves, like talking about Roe versus Wade being overturned or George Floyd and their opinions. And my thing was, wait a minute.
Right.
Which one is it? We can or we can't speak freely and give our thoughts on these things. Right. By the way, if you're talking about abortion on an NBA show, at least I did mine, privately,
independent podcast.
on
Yeah.
public podcast. Yeah. So to me, it was literally about consistency. And as an employer, just like as a parent, like your kids might not make your rules, but if you make them clear and you're consistent, then they'll have to respect them.
Yeah.
So I didn't like them, but I respected them until all of a sudden they allowed everybody else to do it with no repercussions. So listen, it had been years in the making with other things. I was more conservative, but I always kept it separate. I would never even, honestly, I wouldn't even wear my cross on TV on purpose because I was trying to be respectful of people who believe differently. So I always remained neutral and a journalist at my job, and the others did not. And that's why I stood up, and it was the First Amendment based on Connecticut state law, where ESPN is based, First Amendment lawsuit against Disney. And listen, I'm sad at how it ended because it was my dream job and I loved it to the very last day I did it. I'm so proud of what I did there with the great team that I had, especially the last 22 months during a lawsuit where I still went into work every single day and did the job I love with the people that I loved. And that was probably the hardest part, is to compartmentalize for 22 months and knowing that I was hated and that Bob Iger and everybody was trying to, crush me, to put it back here every day and go on live national TV for 2 hours and do my job. And I think that's what I'm most proud of. And then for my kids too, I'll shut up after this because obviously it's still emotional for me. And it's been almost, it's been 3 years since it happened, since the incident. It took a few months to decide whether I was going to sue, because obviously once you sue your company, like, you're going to be gone, you're going to lose your job. But I knew that at some point, like, a line had been crossed, and I was devastated that they treated me differently than my peers because I believed differently. And I called each of my kids the night before the lawsuit was going to drop. And I just wanted them to know what was coming because I knew it was going to be ugly publicly. And, they each had kind of different reactions. My youngest was the most upset. My oldest was cool. She understood it. My son, who's in the middle of these two girls, I just said, I'm sorry, buddy, to all of them. I was like, I'm sorry. Don't ever feel like you have to defend me. But if someone asks you, then just remember, tell them diversity of thought really does matter. Because coaches, teachers, parents had said things to my kids about me, which, don't get me going.
Yeah.
So my son looked at me and he goes, Mom, it's about time you stood up for yourself.
Wow.
And I knew at that moment, every time I say it, I get choked up. I knew at that moment that even if I lost the lawsuit, that I was going to be okay. I already won because my son and my kids saw that I was not going to take it anymore, that I was going to call them on their BS and try to stand up for other people who'd been silenced, because I knew I was one of just millions. And I had people reaching out to me, countless people at ESPN and Disney, and people across the world who saw my story only because it got big because of the name Disney. So I shudder at the thought of what would have happened if I had stayed quiet, if I had listened to my fears, if I had listened to my peers, to my bosses, to some family members, to social media, to just go away and be quiet and be thankful for all the money you're making and the job that you have. And I'm so glad that I didn't listen to that fear, because my life would be much different. And most importantly, I wouldn't have respected myself. And now, no matter what happens, like, I know that I have principles and I am stronger than I thought. And I pray that it helps others, starting with my 3 kids, so they don't wait 50 years to be true to themselves,
I think just having your son say those words to you were probably the biggest vindication you ever could have gotten. I mean, that's pretty awesome. Yeah.
Thank you. It was a moment that I'll forever, like, I can picture where we were, what he was wearing. And I was just so surprised. And for those parents out there, just remember that our kids see everything.
Yeah. Good,
bad, ugly. In this case, he saw his mom working her ass off to, like, do everything for all of us and following my dreams. But apparently this whole time, he saw me being quiet and hiding and making myself smaller. He saw that too, but he didn't say anything.
Yeah.
So I think it's a beautiful lesson for us parents to know that they're watching. And if we are telling them to go be strong and stand up and have that tough conversation with their teacher or their friend or their coach, or no, take a chance. I know that you're afraid to maybe go to a military academy because it's not traditional college and it's hard. and we're telling them to be tough and strong, and we're sitting here on our hands. No, we have to practice what we preach as parents. So I hope that that's what people can take from my little story.
I love that. Does that play into what you've been doing recently? You've gotten very involved with the campaign. You were out there stumping for Trump in a big way. And was that the catalyst for it? Just like, hey, I'm out here now. I'm going to share how I feel. I'm going to be unapologetically who I am. Like, was that kind of the shift for you that happened?
Yeah, but it was kind of, I didn't think that deeply about it.
Sure.
I knew that this had been building in me for years, but I was never allowed to talk about it at work or on social media, right?
Yeah.
Others who fit into a different category were able to. You were allowed to be anti-Trump and call him a racist and all those things since he got elected in 2016. So that double standard really was, I didn't care, say what you want, but just not, let's be consistent with our rules. So that was building up in me more than I thought, which led to the lawsuit. And then now with this stuff, like I didn't consciously say, I'm going to keep standing up and keep showing them, right? It happened organically. And when I had Laura Trump on my show over the summer, and it aired actually 3 days before her father-in-law got shot in Butler, Pennsylvania.
Wow. Okay.
And then I had Lynn Patton, one of his advisors, on my show too. And I struck up a friendship with them. And then when they were really deciding to push hard on the women for Trump, they asked me to come. They gave me the pretty pink jacket. We went to Atlanta the first time, and I was like, this is so amazing. And we went into one of the campaign headquarters in Atlanta, and all the people who were volunteering their time, men, women, Black, white, Hispanic, gay, like it was so diverse.
Yeah.
And then we went to the Trump campaign, donated a couple tons of food in conjunction with Goya Foods. We went to a food bank and helped deliver food and learned about the food bank and how the families, they had been serving 400 families per week since Biden took office in 2021. 400 is now increased to 1,700 families a week that rely on food from these food banks because of the economy and inflation. So I got there and I learned. And then we went to a woman-owned business. This woman that had the courage to start a donut shop. That was her dream, and she did it. So there's such strength with these women that Laura Trump had gathered, and I had never felt that in my life. Certainly not as a sportscaster, certainly not as a female sportscaster, and certainly not in many other ways too, where there was so much divisiveness, and because of your politics or your gender or your skin color. And for me, I never fit into any category because I'm half white and therefore I'm a sellout. Like, oh my God. So I just loved being around these women who cared about each other and just wanted this country to be better. And it was addicting. And it had nothing to do with being loud about it. It had everything to do with how I felt when I was there, including the day before the election in North Carolina. I'm on the ground with Tulsi Gabbard and Danica Patrick, and we're stumping. We did 6 different stops that day, Ryan, in Buncombe County, Asheville, North Carolina, that is completely devastated by what happened with Hurricane Helene. And after a week, those stories of devastation were out of the news cycle.
Right.
No one talks about these people. So that's what kept me going, is realizing that these people, they just wanted a hug. They just wanted to see that someone still cared. And if by me showing up helped someone because they saw me when I used to do basketball and football highlights, like, how could I not? Like, it was the most humbling, awesome, beautiful thing that has changed my life. Like, I'm trying to figure out ways now to help. And actually, I'm getting ready to drive up to Tampa on my own dime. I hired a camera crew because I just want to go to these places where families are living in churches or hotels. And Samaritan's Purse, this amazing charity that helps people rebuild, and like it's a faith-based thing. Sorry, I'm going off. Like, I just did it because I felt like, oh, these are nice women who I happen to align with, who want to include me in something special.
Right.
And it turned into this thing that has changed my life. And again, I shudder at the thought of what had happened if I had stayed quiet. And that's why this is a God thing. That's why I know I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. That's why I am now fearless. And I don't care what people think. which for years was leading me because I was such a pleaser and I wanted to make sure everybody in my circle and my sphere or on social media knew that I was really nice and a really hard worker and a good mom. And, and now I don't care. Like, you can hate me because of my politics or because of the way I talk or because of my hair or whatever it is, all the reasons I hear every day. I know that by taking some chances and some risks that I'm helping other people who have been afraid to speak up. And it's funny. I feel like in the last couple of years, obviously, I knew that my mission in life was to try to be a good mom. And I now feel like I know why God has me here, to be a good mom to those 3 psycho kids and to stand up for other people who can't, or who are afraid to, because the fear is real and it's legitimate. And so now I know why I'm here, and I don't know what it means for tomorrow. I don't know what it means for the future of my show or anything else. I don't care, because it's just going to work out. But like, it's super cool to no longer live in fear of anything and just to trust.
That has to be super liberating. And I'm very familiar with Samaritan's Purse. I did a symposium on education with the younger Graham at College of the Ozarks one year. And we shared our joint missions. And I can tell you, I had seen on your social media when you were down there in North Carolina, and I'm friends with Tulsi. She's been on the show, and I was so in awe of her, and I shared with her publicly and privately, that I was proud of her for stepping out in the way she did, and it very similar to you, just kind of following her convictions, and
Right.
really being true to herself. Whether you believe in the direction she took or not, I don't think that we can not be appreciative of somebody that, knows that they're going to get criticized, knows that they're going to, that they're going to turn a bunch of people against them, and it just doesn't matter because it's what they believe in. And
she's feeling it right now, right?
Yeah.
I mean, she's in deep right now. And after one of the stops in North Carolina that day that I had posted about, we both got back in the car and looked at each other, and we were both just crying. And it's such perspective. I think it's beautiful, right? To be able to get outside of ourselves and our own problems and issues, which are real.
Yeah.
We should never compare or minimize, ever. And at the same time, it does help make me say, okay, this sucked today, but I'm going to be fine. And now I am so excited to try to uplift others who are in it. I'll say this though, the people of North Carolina and Eastern Tennessee and Western Florida, and I have a cousin in Augusta, Georgia, it's been devastated there. No one talks about it. 30 dead people in Augusta, Georgia. No one knows that, right? It's incredible. But their spirit and their support of each other, not only is it just inspiring, it's a reminder of how great America is and how these people who have nothing left are saying, you know what, I could use that generator, but the people down the road, they're feeling it a little bit worse. Like, the spirit of America is so great, and there's so much positivity despite the devastation. And I'm looking forward to trying to uplift and just tell their stories because they matter. And I hate that so many have been forgotten because of where we were in, the news cycle with the election.
It's tough. And I can tell you, one of the things we do with Gold Star families is we do service expeditions. And so, for us, when we lost my brother, we found very quickly that the greatest way for us to heal was to serve others. And so we wanted to present that opportunity to other families of the fallen to say, hey, listen, don't pull the covers up over your head. We're going to give you a way to heal, and it's going to be in service to others. It's going to be to continue your loved one's legacy of service. And so we go across the country and do just that. And we've been going back to Puerto Rico for 8 years now. And I'm going back there again in January. And it's been 8 years since they were hit with, devastating hurricane.
Oh.
And there are still houses that don't have roofs over their heads 8 years later. And every time I go to a different expedition, We go to Alaska. We're in Georgia. But I have fallen in love with the people of Puerto Rico. I've gone back there. This will be my 5th time there. And every time I go there, they give me so much more than I could ever give them. And we spend a week there, rebuilding homes. And I walk away just feeling so fulfilled. But again, forgotten the day after it happened. There was this big rush there, and then it was gone. And, these people ask for nothing. And it's hard in our 24-hour media and the stuff that we consume, and that unfortunately the stuff that makes the headlines is not the stuff we should be talking about.
Exactly.
And that's the problem.
That's why what you're doing, like what you've done with this show, and like you said, the Gold Star, I mean, there's so much, that's a choice that you've made, it's for no other reason but to honor your brother and to help others who are going through such a tragedy. And I imagine how that feels when you see those families and those kids and others. And unfortunately, you have that in common. But the good that you've created from the worst situation, again, you didn't have to do it. We all make choices and decisions. And look at what your kids are taking from this too, which means they will parent differently. Like the domino effect of us choosing to do what's in our heart, even if it's scary or expensive or whatever it is, it's incredible. It's really kind of like endless and infinity level, because people see it and they talk about courage being contagious. And it really is. I know that for a fact now. So I hope that you, every once in a while, do pat yourself on the back and do, congratulate yourself in some ways, because you could have handled this in many different ways and you've helped endless people. And I see behind you your set and the flag and your brother. Like it's a choice that you made. And I know this from, I've said it before, but as a military kid, even though it wasn't West Point, my dad always taught us that cadet prayer, and he forced us to memorize it at West Point. And it's helped me to choose the harder right instead of the easier wrong, and never to be content with a half truth when the whole can be won. And that's exactly what you've done. I've done it in frankly, a much less important way. There was no one that I lost, but there was other kinds of loss, but nothing. Again, I know we shouldn't compare, but it's true. And we know the harder right. We just don't like it because it's uncomfortable, and for very legitimate reasons. It is easier to stay quiet and silent. And now that we know that the whole truth in life and politics and all these things, like the end of that prayer, I can never be content with a half truth if we can win the whole truth. Like it's just not in me. And that's my dad's fault. That's your dad's fault.
My dad's fault too. Absolutely. And I will tell you, you had that moment with your son where he said, it's time you stood up for yourself 2 years ago. I didn't know where my oldest daughter was going to go to school, but she was getting ready to go to school. I knew it was going to be one of the last times that she would be home, that I could do something. And I said to her and my younger daughter at the time, I said, you guys are coming to Puerto Rico with me. And I took them, and, I was nervous about what they were going to see and experience. And it was probably one of my proudest moments as a parent, watching them step up in the way they did and watching them serve for that week.
Wow.
It was truly incredible. So I get that, for everything that we do, watching how the way your actions influence your children, there's nothing more rewarding as a parent than to see them fulfill their potential and knowing you played a tiny little piece of that. So it's pretty
so funny.
awesome.
Just last week, my daughter was really struggling with a professor at school. And one of those professors that has terrible ratings, she's freaking out. I'm like, okay. And what are you going to do about it? You sit here and complain to me because it doesn't matter. And I paid the tuition. Like, what are you going to do? So long short, she wrote something up, and then she got her classmates together, and they together walked in there and had a conversation. God forbid you have a conversation, not an email, not a text, a conversation with this professor. The professor knew she had kind of initiated it, called her back in later. And she loves the class all of a sudden. And the teacher's changing the way she teaches as well. I'm like, it is the harder
Yeah.
thing, but it was the right thing. And look what came when you got out of your comfort zone and talked to this mean teacher. And now look, like there's so many lessons that we can push them to try and experience from a young age, right? And on the playground at school. Did you mean to kick him? No. Okay, don't walk away. Go back over.
Yeah.
Own it. I don't know. It's just, to me, that's something that has guided me my whole life whenever I've had a tough decision to make. And that includes suing Disney, of all things. I knew it was the harder right, even though I'm like, oh, they're going to crush me. Talk about David versus Goliath. And it didn't turn out that way.
It's amazing. Sage, I always finish by asking everyone, and certainly, gosh, just this conversation with you, I feel like I could answer it for you. And it's true that you do it every day, but what does living a resilient life look like for you?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I feel like I'm living it and I'm blessed to live it. I'm blessed to have to make these decisions to choose to push through. Um, I am, I think we all are tougher than we think. But again, we live in that fear. And all I can say is when you do choose that harder right, instead of the easier wrong, on the other side, you're really proud of yourself. And then you realize that wasn't that bad. And then the next time something happens, you have a little bit more courage to just try. And oh, by the way, I've fallen on my face countless times publicly for the world to see. And I still wake up the next day. That is resilience. But then what do you choose to do with it? And I choose to share it, because what a waste if I just take this for myself, all the lessons that I'm learning from these scary, costly moments, you know? I don't like to, it's like, how do you describe yourself? It's uncomfortable, whatever. But I can say that I'm resilient, but I truly believe it has nothing to do with me. For me, I know that it's my faith in God that has helped me be resilient and push through when I literally wanted to run away. I wanted to go away. I wanted to disappear. And prayer helped that. And so I can't take that much credit, but I just would be so sad if people didn't push through those fears, because on the other side, it can be kind of cool.
Got to push through every day. Totally agree. Sage, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it and love the conversation, and keep pushing forward.
I promise you. Thank you for what you're doing, Ryan.
Thank you.